Born to a tanner and his wife in the tiny Clermont County community of Point Pleasant in 1822, Hiram Ulysses Grant ultimately became a Civil War hero and the 18th President of the United States. Who was Grant? Historian Gary Knepp points out that if given a choice, Grant would not have picked being president or general.
No doubt about it, he'd rather be a horse trader than a general and a president, is what he said. The other option that he wanted to be, and this is where I think he was reflecting on his life as he was reading through, as he was writing his memoirs, he wanted to be a math teacher. You don't think of Ulysses S. Grant as a math teacher, but that was always been his best academic subject through high school and later at West Point.
What was it about this man of such humble origin that led him to become a strategic soldier and quiet statesman that united a country split in half by conflict? Some say it was because Ulysses was an ordinary man who could do extraordinary things. Greg Roberts is with Historic New Richmond, the organization that runs the Grant Museum in Point Pleasant.
This village and a lot of places along the river here have not changed since the 1850s. So you can virtually step back in time, and it's an experience that's visceral. It's like you can't get this by watching TV or watching your computer screen and on the internet.
How did Grant get his name?
There was a debate between the mother's side and the father's side of the family, and they agreed that his given name would be Hiram Ulysses Grant, Hiram being the favored name of the Simpson side of the family. Well, Grant's father always referred to young Hiram as Ulysses, or Lys. So as he grew up in Georgetown, that's what he became known as. When Congressman Hamer wrote up the paperwork for his appointment to West Point, he assumed wrongly that his first name was Ulysses. He also assumed wrongly that his middle name was his mother's maiden name, Simpson. Hence, the paperwork was written up as Ulysses Simpson Grant. Of course, when Grant saw this, when he arrived at West Point, he said, "Well, you've got this wrong." And he protested, but he found out quickly that it was to no avail, that from then on he was known as Ulysses S. Grant.
As a child, Grant disliked working beside his dad in the family tannery.
Young Grant preferred to toil on the farm where his love of horses and his ability to manage horses became well known throughout Brown County.
From the earliest days, his mother recorded seeing him walk as a toddler in the barn, walking among the big horses. And the horses, she said, seemed to understand Ulysses, and he understood them. And despite walking by these huge animals, and they were all draft horses, he never was hurt. They never kicked him, they never stepped on him. He seemed to understand it.
When the Civil War broke out, he volunteers, he tries to get an appointment with the Federal Army, but he's turned away. He's not granted a commission back in the Federal Army. He organizes Illinois Volunteers and takes rough recruits from again the frontier and turns them into soldiers. And with those soldiers, he starts becoming successful in the West, along the way, in Kentucky, in Tennessee. And as the Eastern armies are sluggishly entrenched in Washington, D.C., and get pummeled by Lee's armies, Grant is winning battles in the West, and his fame grows.
Grant was a great soldier for a number of reasons. I think in some cases he had what Napoleon called the genius of the glance. Napoleon talked about the fact that some people had the opportunity to immediately size up a situation. Some people take a while to analyze it. Grant, in the situations, tactical situations, he had this immediate ability to figure out what was going on with his armies. He also had almost what we would call a photographic memory for terrain features. And of course, deploying an army over battlefield was very important, but he had numerous occasions when he had just traveled over a piece of property 25 years ago, was able to know the features of the land. He knew where the rivers were, he knew where the swales were and the hillsides and things of that sort, and people were amazed at his ability to do that.
Early 20th century historians discounted Grant. They, again, basically said it was inevitable that the North had all these superior industry, superior numbers, and that the South's defeat was inevitable, that Grant just happened to be the guy in charge, and that is so far from the truth. The modern military historians are now realizing that Grant was a masterful strategic general. His plans to defeat the Confederate armies that had entrenched in Vicksburg initially, and then later when he was given charge of all the Union armies, Fredericksburg, and the campaign in Virginia, where every other Union general had been repelled, Grant pressed forward, and his strategies eventually, again, won the war.
After the war, Grant became a national hero. He was appointed America's first four-star general. At the age of 46, he became the youngest president of the United States up to that time.
His presidency has begun to be reevaluated and moving up in the rankings, if you will, for the primary reasons these. Economics, he returned to the gold standard. He repaired relations with Great Britain, which had been strained because of the war. But most importantly, he was being reevaluated because of his civil rights stands. Specifically, he supported the rights of black men to vote on the 15th Amendment. He was a very strong supporter of that. When the Ku Klux Klan was active and other groups like them were active in the South and they were killing blacks and intimidating whites, he sent the army in and prosecuted them under a new law that he asked the Congress to pass to give the federal government the rights to go in and deal with these issues. The other aspect, again, was Indian rights. And at a time when one of his favorite generals, Philip Sheridan of Ohio, said the only good Indian is a dead Indian, he's the one that came up with that. And another man from Blanchester, John Shivington, when asked why he killed young children in a massacre at Sand Creek, he said, "Nits make lice." That's the attitude that was going on at that particular time about American Indians. But Grant stepped in. He put in Quakers as reservation agents to help in that regard. He protected property in the Badlands and among the Nez Perce out in the Oregon, Washington area. And one historian said that because of Grant's attitude, he prevented the American Indians from going extinct.
First national park was created while Grant was president. The Transcontinental Railroad was completed under Grant's administration. So there are many great accomplishments.
After leaving the White House, Grant's history of problems in civilian life continued.
In those days, they did not have pensions for presidents or generals. So he had no money coming in from his government services. He listened to a son of one of his sons and invested what money he did have and asked his friends to also invest in a Wall Street firm that was an early Bernie Madoff, I guess you could say. It was a Ponzi scheme. And again, Grant was very trusting. He was not involved in this at all. But he lost everything. And many people in his former veterans lost money. So he was bankrupted, essentially.
In 1884, he also learned he had throat cancer.
I'm told today that his cancer would have been treated today. But of course, in 1884, when he was diagnosed, it was a death sentence. So he knew he was going to die.
And at that time, Century Magazine asked him if he would be interested in writing a series of articles about his experience in the war. Grant thought that he was not a very good writer and did not really want to do it, but he needed the money. So when he wrote the articles and received about $100 apiece for the articles, which was pretty good money in those days for that purpose, they were very well received by the public. And so Century Magazine thought that maybe it would be a good idea to try to convince him into writing his memoirs. Grant still didn't think he was a very good writer. He didn't want to do it, but he realized that he had to do something to help Julia, who he was very close with his wife and wanted to make sure that she had the kind of money to live out her life. But then when a very famous author in the United States found out that he was getting a bad deal, he came to him and said, "Look, they're cheating you. You deserve a lot more money and I could get you more money." And that was the beginning of a friendship between Ulysses S. Grant and Mark Twain.
Grant died at the age of 63.
His funeral procession, which occurred in New York City, was over 7 miles long, and they turned people away. There were over 1.5 million people along Broadway and other streets on Manhattan Island to observe his funeral. he was by far the most beloved and respected man of his time. Grant should be remembered up there with Lincoln and Washington as really a true savior of this nation. He is given very little credit for his role in preserving the Union and freeing over 4 million African American slaves. Again, today some historians are beginning to recognize his true greatness.
Grant was an ordinary man who did extraordinary things. And so the people of the United States could see themselves in Grant and realize that with hard work and going that they too could succeed.